distortion of widths and depths, Giacometti found the means to activate specific modes of perception. This principle is at its most succinct in this sculpture, where, due to the retreat and diminution of the head, all the energy is concentrated in this intense core which dominates everything around it. The contrast of a tiny head and massive pedestal developed in the miniature sculptures created a tension that takes on an exponentially heightened power. Diego in a Cloak, 1954. Bust of Diego, 1954. Diego in a Plaid Shirt, 1954. The image, with its complex posture and meticulously painted face, uniquely reveals the character of Giacometti's brother, the artist's model, assistant, and crucial support throughout his life. Jean Genet, 1954-55. Portrait of Jean Genet, 1954-55. This portrait is styled after an Egyptian figure of a seated writer in the Louvre, Paris. The painting in its entirety conveys a strong sense of internal flux, while the head seems to float alone, turned in on itself. Portrait of G. David Thompson, 1957. Here, an aggressive reduction of proportions, from the knees to the head, produces an optically disturbing pull into the depths and causes the figure to appear close and distant at one and the same time. Thompson is portrayed as a man of obvious will and ego, whose person extends threateningly forward from his tiny, densely core-like head to his hands, grasping his thighs like mighty claws. Portrait of David Sylvester, 1960. Jean Genet, 1954. Annette, 1954. Igor Stravinsky, 1957. Henri Matisse, 1954. Giacometti was commissioned to design a medallion with the head of Henri Matisse, for which he made numerous life studies, including this one of the painter who died a few months later in Nice. James Lord, 1954. Eberhard W. Kornfeld, 1959. Silvio Bertaux, 1959. Nude, After Nature, 1954. Woman of Venice 2, 1956. Woman of Venice 8, 1956. Woman of Venice 5, 1956. The Women of Venice mark the halfway point in Giacometti's mature work. They bring together the different characteristics of his figures. The extremely small, distant heads and the innovatively sloping pedestals from which the oversized feet grow still make them seem like revelatory, illusionistic visions. Their marked three-dimensionality heightens the erotic quality of the breasts and pelvis, whose curves are accentuated by the hands on either side of it. At the same time, the extreme plasticity brings out the morbid, decaying nature of the amorphously fissured surfaces. The tension in the mingling of goddess and concubine, of Egyptian cult image and decomposing corpse, is seen nowhere as vividly as in this group, in which now one, now another aspect moves into focus. Diego, 1956. The gray mist, licking like a flame around the subject, reads as an almost desperate blow for freedom from the space that refuses to be reconciled with the figure. Yanehara, 1956. In this painting, the perspectival indicators on the background have largely disappeared. Significantly, the trapezoid on the right reads rather as a brace supporting the figure within the rectangle of the picture. All that remain of the pale, yellowish, and grayish floating surfaces is a wholly indefinable spatial mist or color plane, like an internal frame. Portrait of Isaku Yanehara, 1959. Isaku Yanehara, 1961. Still Life with Bottles, 1958. Tall Seated Nude, 1957. This large nude of Annette conveys a somber and gray mood. Yet the more securely rendered figure detached itself somewhat from the misty space and seems to indicate a way out of the crisis. Instead of sinking into the depths, the figure seems to be floating forward, an effect that is reinforced by the narrow vertical format and the dynamic opening of the internal frame at the top, and especially below. Aika, 1959. The vigorous coloration of Aika was inspired by the charm of Giacometti's tailor's 15-year-old daughter. She sat for the painting close to a window, and only during the day. Annette in the Studio, 1961. Four Figures and a Head, 1960. Monumental Head, 1960. Walking Man 2, 1960. Tall Woman 2, 1960. Giacometti proposed a group of larger-than-life-size sculptures, a standing woman, walking man, and a head on a pedestal, representing the three major themes that almost exclusively occupied him in his mature sculptural work. He made tiny models and started in his cramped studio to work on a number of variants for the large figures. Annette, 1959. Annette, 1954. Annette appears in the immediate foreground as a three-quarter-length nude with a sensually rounded body, an image unlike any encountered elsewhere in Giacometti's work. The mutual influence of the different genres of drawing, painting, and sculpture always revolves around issues of seeing, perceiving, and capturing reality. Giacometti's basic phenomenological aim was simply to show the process of seeing. The themes of Giacometti's work ranged most widely in his drawings and similar graphic works. In the paintings, he portrayed familiar landscapes and still lifes, as well as people he knew, but the sculptures were restricted to the head, the standing woman, and the walking man. Similarly, the range of sitters became increasingly narrow. There are only a few moments when the same motif is treated in all three genres. The most intense interchange of this kind may perhaps be seen in the portraits of Annette. Here, Giacometti searched in all mediums for a new, more rigorous evocation of the ephemeral living model. Annette, 1960. Annette 4, 1962. Annette 5, 1962. Annette 4, 1962. Annette 8, 1962. Caroline, 1962. Caroline 2, 1962. The radiance of the figure's personality fills the whole picture. Toward the outside edges of the picture, bare canvas and trails of color clearly made of binding agent and pigment confirmed the reified facture of the painting.